was supposed to be a typical internship, a way to check off a box for my degree while making some extra cash. The ad was simple. Internship available at Northbridge Manufacturing. All majors welcome. Competitive pay. Apply now. A manufacturing factory didn't seem glamorous, but the pay was good, and it was in a field that could potentially open doors. I couldn't afford to be picky. Bills were piling up, and I'd need some work experience to land anything better after graduation. The factory itself was located just outside town, a sprawling complex that looked like it belonged in an industrial park, hidden from most eyes by tall chain-link fences and overgrown shrubbery. The kind of place where you could hear the distant hum of machines day and night. When I arrived on my first day, I was greeted by an old man who didn't smile much but introduced himself as Mr. Collins, the factory supervisor. "Welcome aboard," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip that made me flinch. His cold eyes met mine briefly before he looked away, as if he had something more important to focus on. "You'll start in the main assembly area. Watch, learn, follow the rules, and you'll be fine." I nodded, trying to mask the unease building in my chest. The factory felt different. It wasn't just the hum of the machines that filled the air, but something heavier, something that clung to the walls and pressed into the corners. A sense of age, of things that had been left too long in the dark. It wasn't the kind of place you'd associate with energy or innovation. It felt worn, like a relic that no one had bothered to update in decades. Mr. Collins led me to the main floor, where the assembly line stretched for what seemed like miles. The machines clanked and whirred, their gears turning in perfect synchronicity, producing rows of metal parts that would eventually make their way to assembly lines across the country. I was told that I'd be helping with inventory, paperwork, and general maintenance. Nothing too exciting, just enough to fill up my time and pad my resume. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. I watched as the workers moved efficiently, each of them performing their tasks like clockwork. They hardly glanced up at me as I stood by the side observing. It was clear they didn't expect much from me, and I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. I was introduced to a few colleagues, Sarah, who worked on the metal press machines, and Chris, who was in charge of sorting and quality control. Both of them seemed friendly enough, though there was an odd stiffness to their interactions, like they were hiding something. As the day wore on, I noticed something strange. The factory was eerily quiet, despite the constant noise of the machines. I mean, these were industrial presses and cutting machines, powerful pieces of machinery that should have been making a racket. Yet, in between the clangs and whirs, there was a strange, almost unnatural silence, like the place was holding its breath. Around 5 p.m., I went to the break room to grab a snack. The lights above flickered for a moment, then stabilized. I brushed it off, assuming it was just a power surge. But the second time it happened, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. The lights dimmed slightly before returning to normal, but no one seemed to acknowledge it. The workers, who had previously been bustling around, were now sitting quietly, their gazes fixed on something in the distance. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as if they were waiting for something or perhaps trying to avoid it. "Everything okay?" I asked Sarah, sitting down next to her. She looked up at me, her face pale. "Just the usual," she said, shrugging. "You'll get used to it." I didn't press further, but the words stayed with me, making me wonder what she meant. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing on me, thick and suffocating. It was almost as if the machines, despite their constant motion, were watching, listening. As I sat there, I noticed Chris glance toward the far corner of the room. His face seemed to tighten, and he quickly stood up to leave. I wanted to ask what was going on, but something told me not to push it. Instead, I finished my snack in silence, trying to shake the strange feeling that had settled in my stomach. The rest of the shift passed uneventfully, but as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I began to notice the first oddities that would define my time at Northbridge Manufacturing. The workers began to filter out, heading to their cars or going home for the night, but something felt different, as if the night shift was about to begin, and I was about to be a part of it. The night shift began shortly after the last of the day workers filtered out, leaving behind only the hum of the machines and the silence that seemed to creep deeper into the factory. I watched as Mr. Collins locked up the break room, giving me a brief nod before disappearing into the shadows. The factory now felt entirely different. The ambient noise from earlier, voices, footsteps, the clink of tools, was replaced by a deep mechanical rhythm. The machines, it seemed, had taken over the building, their endless movements echoing in the cavernous space. I found myself alone at my station, a small desk tucked into a corner of the main assembly line where the machines were busily churning out metal parts. The monitor in front of me flickered to life as I logged into the inventory system. At first, it seemed like any other mundane office task. I checked the stock, entered serial numbers, and confirmed shipments for the night. It was supposed to be easy work, but something about the hum of the machines made my fingers twitch uneasily against the keyboard. It wasn't normal. Nothing about this place was normal. As I finished up my first hour of paperwork, I noticed a faint, rhythmic sound coming from the far side of the room, where the large cutting presses were operating. It sounded like someone was tapping on a metal surface, a light, intermittent clink. At first, I thought it might be one of the machines acting up, but when I glanced over, all I saw were the machines moving in sync. No one was nearby. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. I stood up and walked over to investigate. The factory floor, now bathed in the cold glow of overhead lights, looked deserted. No one was around. I crossed the floor and approached the cutting presses, where the source of the noise seemed to be coming from. The large, industrial machines pressed sheets of metal with a low, groaning sound, but there was no one standing nearby. I could hear the tapping now, clearer than ever, as if it were echoing off the walls. I couldn't quite place it, but the sound felt wrong. It was too consistent, too deliberate. A sudden chill swept over me and I paused mid-step. The factory air, which had been warm from the machines, now felt inexplicably cold. I shivered and took a cautious step back. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small flicker in the corner of my eye. Something moving just at the edge of the farthest row of machines. I turned quickly, my heart skipping a beat, but when I looked, there was nothing. Just the machines, turning and whirring in their endless cycle. The moment I looked away, the tapping noise stopped. Dead silence. The machines, for a brief instant, almost seemed to slow their movements, as if they, too, were waiting for something. I waited, holding my breath, staring at the factory floor. But the stillness only lasted for a moment. The machines ramped up again, and the noise returned. A deep, resonant hum that filled the space. I shook my head, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. It was just the machines. They were old, likely on their last legs, nothing to worry about. But then, just as I turned to leave, I heard a new sound. Footsteps. They weren't the heavy industrial sounds of the factory workers, but something lighter. The sound of shoes scuffing against the cement floor, a soft scraping, followed by a faint dragging sound. I froze. The footsteps were coming toward me. I turned, and for a split second I thought I saw someone. A shadow, tall and thin, just beyond the row of cutting presses. But when I blinked, the figure was gone. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. There was no one here. My eyes scanned the area. Nothing but machines and the faint glow of the overhead lights. "Hello?" I called out, the word feeling strange in the vast emptiness. The noise from the machines seemed to intensify around me, drowning out everything else. No response, just the deafening hum of metal pressing against metal. I turned back toward the desk, my hands shaky as I tried to log back into the inventory system. But the screen was flickering now, showing strange static as if the system had a mind of its own. I jabbed at the keyboard, but the screen stayed frozen, and a buzzing noise began to emanate from the speakers. The lights flickered for a moment, and I saw it. In the reflection on the computer screen, there was something, or someone, standing behind me. I jerked around, my heart in my throat, but the space behind me was empty. I spun back to the screen, staring at my reflection. The buzzing in the speakers seemed to increase, a high-pitched whine that made my ears ring. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely type. I hit the escape key, desperate to close out of the screen, but it wouldn't respond. Then, in the reflection on the screen, I saw a figure standing behind me. Tall, shadowed, but undeniably present. The figure's face was obscured, but it was clearly there, watching. I turned quickly, adrenaline flooding my system. Nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Mr. Collins, but just as my fingers hovered over the number, I heard a loud bang. The sudden noise nearly made me drop the phone. It came from the far side of the factory, near the old storage section where they kept the spare parts. I turned toward the sound, heart racing. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The factory wasn't empty. It was never empty. Something or someone was here with me. I stood frozen for a moment, my phone still clutched tightly in my hand, as the noise continued to echo through the factory. The sound, a loud bang followed by a grinding noise, seemed to reverberate off the metal walls, rattling the machinery around me. It was coming from the storage section, a part of the factory that was always off limits after hours. I hesitated, torn between running in the opposite direction and investigating the source of the noise. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound itself. The hum of the machines grew louder, more oppressive, like the very walls of the factory were closing in on me. I forced myself to move, stepping cautiously toward the storage area, each footstep echoing in the unnerving stillness. The factory floor, which had been so busy just hours ago, now felt like an abandoned graveyard. The machines were still running, their mechanical arms and gears grinding away, but there was an eerie sense of emptiness that loomed over the place. I glanced up at the ceiling, half expecting to see something watching me from the shadows, but all I could see were the flickering lights overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. I took a deep breath and forced myself forward, my legs shaky beneath me. The closer I got to the storage area, the more I could feel the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. The temperature had dropped significantly, and I could see my breath puffing out in front of me, even though the factory had always been warm. When I reached the storage area, the door was ajar, just wide enough for me to slip through. The heavy steel door creaked as I pushed it open, and I immediately regretted it. The inside was dark, colder than the rest of the factory, and it smelled musty, like old, forgotten things. Shelves full of dusty equipment and metal parts lined the walls, and there were large crates stacked in the far corner. But the most unsettling thing was the complete lack of sound. The machines outside, the ones that never stopped, had grown quiet. And then I heard it again. The sound of metal scraping, followed by another loud bang. It came from the farthest corner of the room, where the crates were piled high. I slowly made my way toward the noise, my heartbeat thumping loudly in my ears. As I approached the corner, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A row of metal doors, small and rusty, hidden behind some crates. These doors had never been part of the factory layout I had seen during my tour. They weren't marked, and they didn't look like they belonged. Something about them seemed wrong, out of place. The sound of scraping metal grew louder as I reached for the nearest door handle. Before I could touch it, a voice echoed through the storage room, sharp and cold, like a whisper in my ear. "Don't open it." I froze, my hand inches from the door. My breath caught in my throat as the air grew heavier, pressing in on me. The voice hadn't come from anywhere specific. It just seemed to fill the entire room, reverberating off the walls. My stomach churned. It wasn't just a voice, it was a command. I jerked my hand back, the fear crawling up my spine like icy fingers. What the hell was going on? The machines had never stopped, and the voices that didn't belong to anyone here, were starting to invade my mind. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and I could see the faintest flicker of light under one of the doors. It wasn't natural. This place wasn't supposed to have any light coming from behind those metal doors. I took another step back, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone, ready to call for help. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, like someone was walking just behind me, their shoes dragging against the floor. I spun around, but there was no one there. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as the footsteps grew louder, echoing off the walls like they were closing in on me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest. The footsteps stopped, and the room fell into an unbearable silence. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. I glanced down, expecting a text or call, but instead, the screen flickered with static. The phone, now completely unresponsive, turned off before I could do anything. A scream rose in my throat, but I managed to swallow it down. I couldn't panic. Not now, not here. I had to get out. I turned to leave the storage room, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if it had been sealed shut from the other side. I pushed against it with all my strength, but the door wouldn't move. The panic started to rise again, and my breath quickened. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, behind the rows of crates, a figure appeared. A tall, thin silhouette, standing motionless. At first, I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light. But as I squinted into the darkness, I realized it was something. Someone. Real. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. And then the machines came to life again. The grinding, clanking sound erupted from the factory floor, so loud it almost felt like the walls were shaking. The figure didn't flinch. It simply stood there, still and silent. My mind raced. The figure was standing in my way, blocking my escape, and the machines were waking up, growing louder by the second. The factory was alive, and it was no longer a place of work. It was something else. I took a deep breath and pushed forward. My only choice was to escape, to find a way out before whatever was waiting for me in the dark could catch me. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The figure, now almost fully visible in the low light, hadn't moved an inch. It felt as if it was waiting for me to make the first move, and the tension in the air was unbearable. The machines continued to grow louder, their mechanical shrieks mixing with the pounding of my heart. The floor beneath me seemed to vibrate with every motion of the factory, and I had no idea how much longer I could stay in the storage room before my nerves shattered. I pushed against the door again, this time with all my strength. The handle rattled, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to seep in. My breathing came in shallow gasps as I pushed harder, my palms slick with sweat, but the door remained immovable. It was like the factory had decided to trap me in this small, dimly lit corner of hell. The footsteps, once faint, now echoed in the room, drawing closer. My eyes darted around, but there was nowhere to run. I was trapped. And then the whispering started. It was soft at first, a low murmur that seemed to come from the very walls of the room. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice felt familiar. It was the same voice I'd heard earlier, the one that had warned me not to open the door. But this time, it wasn't a command. It was more like a chant, a soft, rhythmic sound that sent chills down my spine. I turned back to the figure. Its form was clearer now, though still shadowed, its edges indistinct. It wasn't a person. At least, not a normal person. It stood unnaturally still, its head slightly tilted, as though it were studying me. The faint glow from under the door had disappeared, and the room had become colder, the air pressing in on me like a physical force. The whispering intensified, growing louder and more urgent. It felt like the walls were closing in, the sound wrapping around me, smothering me. And still, the figure didn't move. It seemed to be feeding off my fear, enjoying my paralysis. I reached for the flashlight in my pocket, my fingers trembling as I pulled it out. The beam flickered weakly before I managed to shine it toward the figure. The light illuminated the space between us, but as I focused on the beam, I realized that the figure wasn't fully visible. It was barely there at all. It was like looking at a shadow in the darkness, its outline faint and shifting. My mind raced. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay in this room with whatever that thing was. I swung the flashlight in a wide arc, hoping to find something, anything, that would give me a way out. My heartbeat was so loud I could barely hear myself think, and the whispering had become a cacophony, a storm of voices filling the air. Without thinking, I rushed toward the door again. I threw my weight into it, throwing all my strength into breaking through. This time, it moved. Just a little. But it was enough. With a final push, the door gave way. I stumbled out into the corridor, gasping for air, desperate to escape the suffocating feeling that had taken over the storage room. The factory floor stretched out before me, the machines still running, still grinding, but I felt like I'd left something behind. The air in the hall was thick, oppressive, and I could still hear the whispering, faint but persistent, just behind me. I moved quickly down the corridor, trying to steady my breathing. The flickering lights overhead seemed to cast shadows that reached out like fingers, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. The factory, once just a place of work, now felt like a living entity, alive with a dark, malevolent energy. As I passed the rows of machines, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The shadows in the corners of the factory were no longer just shadows. They were figures, tall, indistinct forms, standing motionless just outside the range of my flashlight. I could see them now, their outlines blurred but unmistakable. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see their faces. They weren't human. They couldn't be. I quickened my pace, my feet pounding against the cold concrete floor. The factory seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze of machinery, shadow, and dread. I could hear the whispers again, but now they weren't just coming from behind me. They were all around me. "Turn back," one voice whispered, so close it felt like it was in my ear. "You're not supposed to leave." I spun around, but there was no one there. The factory floor was empty. At least, that's what I thought. Suddenly, I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the hall. Its outline was clearer now, its shape more defined, and the thing I had been dreading finally came into focus. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. It was tall, too tall, its body twisted and wrong, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. Its head was small, almost too small for its body, and its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were hollow, dark pits that seemed to suck in the light around them. I froze, unable to move, my body paralyzed by the sheer terror of what I was seeing. It took a step toward me. The machines in the background groaned, their gears screeching as if reacting to its presence. The lights flickered again, this time plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment before they returned. But when they did, the figure was gone. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I stood there in the dim light, heart racing. I could feel the weight of its presence, even though it was no longer in front of me. It was here. It was watching. I had to get out. I turned and ran. I ran, not knowing where I was going, just trying to put distance between myself and the nightmare that had become my reality. The factory's endless maze of hallways seemed to stretch on forever, each turn only making the shadows grow thicker, the darkness more oppressive. I could still feel the weight of those hollow eyes on me, the presence of something watching, waiting for me to slip up. I rounded a corner and slammed into a row of machinery, nearly knocking myself to the ground. The sharp clang of metal reverberated through the hall, but it didn't matter. I had no time to stop, no time to think. I had to keep moving. The whispers from earlier were back, only this time they weren't just whispers. They were voices, multiple voices, all talking at once, echoing in my head. "Why are you running?" one voice asked, cold and amused. "You can't escape." "Don't you see?" another voice murmured. "You're already trapped." I pushed myself off the machine, heart hammering in my chest, trying to block out the cacophony of voices that swirled around me. My mind was a whirlwind of fear, panic, and confusion. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay here. The rules had been clear, don't break them. And yet, here I was, running, defying the one thing I was supposed to do, leave before dawn. As I stumbled down the hallway, I saw the clock on the far wall. It was 3:30 a.m. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had less than half an hour to leave before the factory's curse took full hold. The rules had warned me. They told me to leave before dawn, but I was already too far in. The machines had never stopped. The factory wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding on my fear. I had ignored the first warning when I opened that door. I had ignored the second when I let my curiosity get the better of me. But now, I had broken the most important rule of all. I hadn't left when I should have, and I could feel it. The air around me thickened, the temperature dropping so quickly that I could see my breath forming in the cold, damp space. The lights overhead flickered again, the sound of their electrical buzz grating on my nerves before they went out completely. The factory was swallowed by darkness. My heart lurched, but I didn't stop running. The footsteps. I could hear them now, echoing behind me. Slow, methodical. Each step sounded like it was getting closer. I didn't dare look back. The voices had turned into a low growl, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor, shaking the factory's foundation. My mind raced, desperate for any way out. I needed to find an exit, any exit. Ahead, I saw a door. It was slightly ajar, light spilling from the crack. I rushed toward it, praying it was the way out. But when I reached the door and pushed it open, I froze. The room beyond was familiar, but wrong. It wasn't part of the layout I had seen earlier. It was a small, dimly lit space filled with shelves upon shelves of old tools and forgotten equipment. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the writing on the wall. The words were scrawled hastily, jagged and uneven, in a red substance that looked disturbingly like blood. It read, "The factory is hungry. It will never let you leave." I stepped back, horrified, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. The sound echoed, and the air around me seemed to thicken, the walls closing in. I tried to push against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The darkness in the room deepened, and I could feel the temperature dropping even further. The whispers returned, louder this time, mingling with the sound of metal scraping against metal. A sharp, guttural voice broke through the chaos. "You've broken the rules," it hissed. "Now you belong to the machines." My stomach turned as I felt the floor beneath me tremble. The machines. They were starting again. The rhythmic clank of gears turning, the deep whir of engines powering on. But this time, they were different. They were louder. The sound was no longer just a mechanical hum. It was a growl, a roar, as if the machines themselves were alive, hungry. I backed away from the door, my feet stumbling on the cold concrete, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows that stretched across the room like fingers. The machines roared louder, filling the room with an unbearable cacophony. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was as if the factory was swallowing me whole. I tried the door again, and this time it gave way. I flung it open and bolted back into the hallway. But the factory had changed. The familiar path I had taken no longer existed. The floor beneath me was different, slippery, uneven, as if the walls and floors had shifted while I wasn't looking. I could hear the machines now, all around me, vibrating through the walls, rattling my bones. The sound was deafening. I turned a corner, only to find another hallway stretching into the blackness. The factory seemed endless, a maze with no exit. And in the distance, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. It was my name, but not the voice I recognized. It was cold, distorted, like it was being filtered through static. "You should have left. Now it's too late." I froze. The voice was coming from all directions now, surrounding me, filling my head. The factory was no longer just a place. It was alive, a living entity that thrived on my fear, on my hesitation. And it wasn't done with me yet. I was trapped. The factory, once a place of cold, mechanical rhythm, had transformed into something far more sinister. The walls were closing in, the darkness suffocating, and the hum of the machines, their endless, grinding clatter, had become an oppressive force. I could feel it reverberating in my bones, in the air I breathed. The whispers, those distorted voices followed me wherever I went, taunting me, warning me, but it was too late. I had broken the most important rule. I hadn't left when I should have, and now I had to pay the price. I stumbled through the maze of corridors, desperately trying to make sense of the factory's twisted layout. It felt like the building itself had shifted while I wasn't looking, as if the walls were constantly moving, reshaping themselves to trap me. The exit was no longer where it should have been. I couldn't find the door. I couldn't find a way out. I turned another corner, only to find myself in a large, cavernous room that I hadn't seen before. The ceiling was high, covered in metal beams that stretched into the darkness above. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, and the floor was littered with broken tools and discarded parts. But what caught my attention wasn't the debris. It was the machines. They were enormous, industrial machines that stretched across the room like titans. Their gears ground slowly, mechanically, but there was something different about them. Something alive. Their movements weren't just the usual clanking and whirring. They were deliberate, purposeful. Each press of metal, each turn of the gears sent a shock wave through the room, vibrating the floor beneath my feet. And then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Slowly, the heavy steel door at the far end of the room began to move. I turned toward it, my heart racing in my chest. There was something behind that door, something waiting for me, and I knew, deep down, that I couldn't escape it. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a long, dark hallway stretching into the unknown. I stood frozen, staring at the doorway. I could hear the voice again, louder now, more insistent. "You should have left. Now you'll join us." I couldn't help it. My feet moved of their own accord, drawn to the door like a moth to a flame. I knew I should resist, knew that whatever lay beyond that threshold was not meant for me. But the pull was irresistible. The factory wanted me. It had always wanted me. I stepped forward. As I crossed the threshold, the air grew colder, heavier. The whispering voices seemed to grow louder, overwhelming me. I could feel their cold fingers brushing against my skin, tightening around my throat, making it hard to breathe. The darkness seemed to swallow me whole, but I couldn't stop myself from walking down the hallway. The machines continued their rhythmic clanking behind me, and I could feel their presence at my back, urging me forward, urging me deeper into the belly of the factory. Each step I took felt like I was being drawn closer to my doom, but I couldn't turn back. It was like the factory itself had its claws in me, and I was its prey. I stumbled forward, my vision blurring, my mind unraveling as the shadows pressed in on all sides. The hallway stretched out before me, and I knew that I was nearing the heart of the factory, the place where all the machinery came to life. The whispers were deafening now, filling my head with incoherent murmurs. "You're not leaving. Join us, forever." I couldn't tell if the voices were inside my head or if they were coming from the machines themselves. It didn't matter. I was already too far gone. At the end of the hallway, I saw it. A vast, open chamber filled with machines, their gears grinding, their presses whirring, all moving in perfect, synchronized chaos. The room was illuminated by a harsh, flickering light, casting strange shadows on the walls. It felt like the heart of the factory, the beating, mechanical pulse that kept it alive. And then I saw them. Figures, shadows that moved in the corners of the room, their forms indistinct, but their eyes glowing in the darkness. They watched me, silent and still, like silent witnesses to my fate. The machines stopped moving. The air grew thick with anticipation. I took one more step forward, and as I did, everything froze. The machines, the shadows, the voices, they all stopped, as if the factory itself had taken a breath. I stood there, paralyzed, unsure of what was happening. The floor beneath me trembled, and then, with a deafening crash, the machines started moving again, faster than before, their gears grinding and turning with ferocious intensity. The figure at the center of the room, the one I had been avoiding, the one I had feared, stepped forward. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and malevolent. "You've stayed too long," it whispered, the words slipping through the air like poison. "You're ours now." The ground shook beneath me, the air crackling with dark energy. I knew I couldn't escape. The factory had claimed me. There was no way out, no way to undo the damage I had done by staying. And as the machines moved faster and faster, their gears grinding louder than ever, I understood. I was never meant to leave.